Smoke from the grill stung worse than my son's jab. "You're just a broke old woman," Dad echoing over clinking beer bottles. I'm Corbin Halloway, 58, an internal controller clutching a smooth, unchipped coffee cup like it could anchor me. Ever had one remark flip your whole life on its head? The smell of hickory smoke curled through the heavy Carolina air, clinging to my shirt and making my eyes water. It should have been the kind of evening I liked, neighbors chatting slow and easy, Marla setting out deviled eggs on a wobbling picnic table, cicadas thrumming in the background like an old fan. But then Keaton's voice cut through the chatter, sharp and loud enough for the whole backyard to hear. "You're just a broke old woman, Dad." It came wrapped in a laugh like it was supposed to be a joke, but it stung worse than the smoke, worse than the heat rolling off the grill. The people around us chuckled awkwardly, not sure where to look. One neighbor coughed into his solo cup. Another found something fascinating about the potato salad. Marla gave me a look, half apology, half warning, and I felt every bit of my 58 years sink into my bones. I didn't say a word, didn't trust myself to. My tongue tasted like ash. I handed the tongs to no one in particular and walked back into the house, letting the screen door slap shut behind me. Inside, the quiet was almost a relief, though I could still hear faint laughter drifting through the window screens. I opened the pantry and reached for my old chipped coffee cup, the one I never let anyone else use. The cup's glaze caught a streak of evening light polished from years of careful cleaning. I wrapped my hand around it, my thumb, finding the shallow groove near the handle like it always did, and held it a moment. It felt solid, familiar. Something no one could take from me, at least not yet. I poured myself a splash of lukewarm coffee from the half-empty pot, just to have something to do with my hands. The cicadas outside buzzed louder, almost drowning out Keaton's voice, as he carried on telling someone near the grill. "Don't worry, I'll handle the house paperwork soon. Dad's not exactly up to speed on these things. Paperwork, my house." The words prickled down my spine, but I stayed quiet, sipping coffee that tasted stale and bitter. When I stepped back out, Keaton was waiting with that smirk of his. He slid a flimsy Father's Day card into my hand, something bought last minute, probably from the gas station on the corner. He leaned close, his breath tinged with cheap beer and barbecue sauce. "Don't worry, Dad," he murmured. "Just for me, I'll take care of everything, even if you can't." Before I could respond, he turned and clapped a neighbor on the back, laughing like he'd just delivered the punchline of the year. Marla hovered near the picnic table, her mouth a thin, straight line. I slipped back inside, card still in my hand, and ran the coffee cup under warm water at the sink. The late sun came through the window, landing on the ceramic just so. That's when I saw it, a thin hairline scratch I could have sworn hadn't been there before, running along the rim like a quiet warning. I held the cup up to the light, listening to the cicadas rise and fall outside, wondering if anyone else heard the crack forming beneath all the noise. The mortgage envelope was heavy with drizzle when I pulled it from the mailbox, the ink bleeding at the edges like it had already been through one storm. Inside, the statement felt foreign in my hands. My name, Corbin Halloway, faint and fading under a bold, dark signature that wasn't mine. Keaton's looping scrawl sat where mine should have been, crisp and assertive, as if he'd been signing my life away, while I wasn't looking. I stood in the doorway of my home office, the morning light gray and watery, casting faint streaks across the cluttered desk. The room smelled of black coffee, stale paper, and the faint ozone tang from the printer that had been running late into the night. On the desk, my old chipped coffee cup waited, polished clean, but still wearing that faint hairline scratch along the rim. A reminder of things that looked whole until they weren't. I set the mortgage statement beside it, flattening the damp paper. I didn't curse or throw anything. That's not my way. I just sat, stared, and opened my laptop. A blinking draft email stared back at me from my work folder, subject line, Contingency, Halloway Property. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but now it felt less like a draft and more like a warning. Donna from HR had called me the day before, her voice low, even though it was just the two of us on the line. "Corbin," she'd said, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but someone's been filing things under your employee ID filings that don't make sense. Check your mortgage documents and your 401k. Then she hung up like she was afraid someone might trace the call. I pulled up my bank statement, scrolling past months of careful budgeting. Then the red flags began to pop: small withdrawals from my 401k, irregular late fees I hadn't noticed buried in pages of numbers, each one traced back somehow to accounts Keaton had access to. My son, who still called me dad with a smirk, had been treating my name and my money like tools in his kit. The worst was the quitclaim deed. I found it buried in the online filings, my breath slowing as I clicked through. My signature was there, faint, but the metadata didn't lie: timestamp edits at odd hours, initials in the margins that matched Keaton's email handle. Someone had filed a transfer, subtle and deliberate, giving him legal footing to inch closer to taking the house. That was when Donna's email arrived, flagged confidential. The thread contained timestamped edits, metadata trails, and an attached screenshot showing Keaton's credentials accessing internal systems he had no business near. My chest tightened as I hit print. The old printer hummed, stuttered, and then spit out page after page, each one smelling faintly of warm toner. My fingers trembled as I gathered them, not from anger, but from the quiet, growing certainty that something irreversible was happening. The cup sat on the desk beside the growing pile of evidence, its scratch catching the glow of the desk lamp. I wrapped my hand around it, steadying myself, feeling the faint groove press against my skin like a pulse. The printer clicked off, leaving the room suddenly too quiet. That's when my phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with Keaton's name. "Dad, we should talk about the house. Tonight." The message glowed in the dim office. I stared at it, the printer's heat still lingering on my fingertips, and realized the storm outside wasn't the only thing creeping closer. "Corbin, you need to get ahead of this before he buries you," Amos said, his spoon circling his coffee like it was a divining rod. The diner's neon sign outside blinked lazily in the late winter dusk, red and blue hues pooling against the rain-speckled windows. The smell of bacon grease and burnt toast clung to the air, weaving around the low hum of a country song drifting from the jukebox. I wrapped my hands around my chipped coffee cup, the same one I'd grabbed from home, by habit, its tiny groove on the rim fitting neatly beneath my thumb. Amos tapped the cup twice with his spoon, his eyes narrowing as he muttered, "Things crack before they shatter, Corbin. You can't just sit on this." He was the kind of man who made advice sound like a court order, semi-retired now. Amos Templeton had once been the attorney every mid-size firm in Charlotte feared to face. His gruff warmth hadn't softened with age, though. He looked at me over the steam rising between us, his lined face creasing further. "Your son isn't just dabbling, my friend. Quitclaim deeds, tampered filings. He's laying tracks. If you don't counter, you'll wake up one morning to find your house listed under his LLC." I let out a short, dry laugh, the kind that buys you a second to think. "You make it sound like I've been sleepwalking." Amos leaned in, lowering his voice as Syl, the waitress, slid a plate of pie onto the table. She tilted her head and misheard me muttering, Keaton, under my breath, chirping, "Did you just call him Kitten? Cute nickname?" Her smile faded when neither of us laughed. "Enjoy the pie," she said, retreating quickly, her sneakers squeaking on the tile. The pie sat untouched between us, cooling. Amos pulled a yellow legal pad from his leather briefcase, its edges worn soft. "Here's what you do. Document everything, every email, every late fee. Print and timestamp it. Next, install a simple camera. Nothing fancy, just enough to catch who's been moving papers or accessing your office. Then when the timing's right, we file quietly. You don't tip your hand until the court date's set." I sipped my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. The diner's fluorescent lights flickered, casting momentary shadows over Amos's face as he sketched a timeline on the pad. His pen tapped the dates: 2015, 2017, now 2019, each one sounding like a nail driven into something I couldn't yet see the shape of. We ate forkfuls of pie, neither of us tasting it, trading short remarks about weather and local sports, just to keep the silence from swallowing us whole. Outside, a truck roared past, shaking the window. Amos pushed the pad toward me. "If you're not ready to fight Corbin, he'll take everything," he said, voice low. "Not just the house, even your dignity. And you don't get that back with a court order." I folded the pad into my coat pocket, the weight of it pressing against my ribs like a concealed oath. My humor, the thin veneer I'd worn for years, felt stretched to tearing. Then I guess it's time I stopped waiting for cracks to fix themselves, I murmured, sliding the cup away as if distance could stop it from splintering next. The diner's bell jingled softly as I pushed open the glass door. The air outside was cold and wet, the asphalt slick under the dim glow of the flickering neon. Across the two-lane road parked at the edge of the lot was a silver sedan I knew too well, Keaton's. Its engine idled softly windows. Dark, like a held breath. I froze coat collar, pulled tight, watching my own breath rise in thin clouds. The car didn't move, neither did I. The hum of the neon behind me buzzed louder as if it sensed what was waiting on the other side of the road. The day the world locked down, so did our last thread of civility. Rain streaked the kitchen window in slow, uneven trails, each drop catching the gray morning light before slipping into the gutter below. The low hum of a news anchor talking about historic layoffs and record unemployment droned from the living room TV, cutting through the stillness. I stood by the counter, hands on a bottle of sanitizer, watching Keaton pace like a caged animal in the narrow space between the stove and the back door. Masks were scattered across the counter, some crumpled, some neatly stacked beside unopened cans of soup. The pandemic had turned my modest home into a bunker, a place where we measured our days by the number of disinfectant wipes left in the drawer. Keaton's sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as he spun to face me, eyes wild. "You don't get it, Dad. I had no choice. The market's tanked. Everyone's bleeding. You think sitting on that 401k while I drown makes sense?" I kept my voice level, even as my fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "You didn't ask, Keaton. You took. There's a difference." His laugh was sharp, bitter. "A loan, Dad. I'll make it back. It's not like you're using it for anything exciting." His words carried a frantic edge, but beneath them, I heard something else, guilt tangled with desperation. His once cocky posture sagged for just a moment as his gaze flicked toward the chipped coffee cup sitting beside the sink, a leftover from my early morning ritual. Marla chose that moment to step in, shaking rain from her coat as she crossed the threshold. "Can we not do this now?" she said, voice low but firm. She looked from me to Keaton, her eyes softening when they landed on him. "He's scared, Corbin. Everyone's scared right now." Keaton latched onto her pity like a lifeline. "See, even Marla gets it. This isn't just about me wanting more. This is survival. I'll fix it, I swear." The tension in the room coiled tighter, like the wind outside pushing rain harder against the window. I reached for the cup, intending only to move it out of the way, but Keaton's elbow caught my arm as he gestured wildly. The cup tumbled, hitting the floor with a dull, final sound. When I bent to pick it up, a jagged crack traced along its side, splintering the once sturdy ceramic into something fragile and unfamiliar. I held it for a moment, rain hammering the glass behind me. The news anchor now listing more companies cutting jobs. Keaton muttered something about paperwork delays as he ducked into the hallway, avoiding my eyes. Marla sighed and followed him, murmuring, "Just breathe, both of you." Alone in the kitchen, I stared at the cup, my reflection warped in the glossy surface between the fissures. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Keaton. "I took the money, yes. I'll pay it back once things stabilize. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." I didn't respond. Instead, I took a screenshot, my finger steady on the button despite the ache in my chest. By midnight, I sat at my desk with Amos's legal pad, unfolded beside me, the crack in the cup catching the glow from my desk lamp. The rain hadn't stopped, and the house smelled faintly of damp wood and burnt coffee. Each note Amos had written, email, camera footage file, quietly suddenly felt heavier, as if etched into something far more permanent than paper. I cradled the cracked cup, thumb resting along its new fault line. There was no mending what had broken tonight, not really, but there was still time to act before everything collapsed. My laptop chimed a soft, sterile notification. Filing deadline confirmed. April 3rd, 2020. The glow of the screen washed over my hands, one holding the mouse, the other clutching the fractured cup. Outside, thunder rolled low, distant but growing. I never thought I'd be sworn in against my own son, but the fluorescent hum of the legal office made it all too real. The sound was constant, like a distant insect trapped inside the ceiling, a reminder of how sterile and unforgiving the space was. The air smelled faintly of sanitizer and stale coffee, as if every trace of humanity had been scrubbed clean and replaced with something hollow. Outside the wide windows, late autumn leaves swirled in restless spirals across empty streets, driven by a wind sharp enough to sting through a wool coat. I had parked 2 blocks away, leaving the cracked coffee cup in my car's cup holder, where the jagged line along its side caught a thin beam of morning sun, a strange little sentinel watching over a day I never wanted to face. Amos sat beside me, calm as ever, his reading glasses perched low on his nose as he reviewed a sheaf of notes. His voice was steady, low enough that the court reporter on the far end of the room wouldn't hear. "Answer only what's asked, Corbin. No elaboration. Keep it clean, keep it true. Let the documents speak for themselves." His hand, worn and calloused despite years behind a desk, tapped my folder gently before sliding it closer. Inside, I had everything: bank statements, Donna's forwarded email chain screenshots of Keaton's confession, and the quitclaim deed that had felt like a knife in my back when I first saw it. Keaton walked in a few minutes later, the smirk still on his face, but not as steady as it used to be. He was wearing a dark suit, probably rented, with a tie slightly askew. His lawyer, a sharp woman with an expression like polished steel, followed close behind, carrying a tablet and a thin binder. Keaton avoided my eyes as he took his seat across from me, drumming his fingers on the polished wood table. The court reporter adjusted her keyboard, her nails clicking softly as she tested the keys, and then the session began. The lawyer's questions started polite, almost perfunctory. My name, my role at my company, my income history, but the tone shifted quickly. "Mr. Holloway, would you agree that you have been showing signs of forgetfulness in recent years?" she asked, her brow arched like she already knew the answer she wanted. "Would it be fair to say your finances have been disorganized?" I steadied my voice. "I'd say I've been meticulous, and I have timestamps, records, and third-party corroboration to confirm it." I slid a bank statement across the table, each withdrawal marked with dates and initials. Amos's pen clicked once, sharp and deliberate, a signal that I was on solid ground. Keaton shifted uncomfortably as Donna's emails came into play. One by one, Amos guided me through, presenting them, each time-stamped edit, highlighting how Keaton had tampered with digital forms. The lawyer's questions grew shorter, more clipped, as if she could feel the narrative slipping away from her. Then came the crack in Keaton's mask. "I only took what was mine to keep us both afloat," he blurted, leaning forward, his palms flat on the table. The court reporter's fingers flew, capturing every word. The lawyer shot him a look sharp enough to cut, but the damage was done. The words hung heavy in the air, too raw to spin into something cleaner. I reached into my folder without a word and pulled out the printed screenshot of his text message from the night everything broke apart. Sliding it across the table, I watched the lawyer's eyes narrow as she read the words. "I took the money, yes. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." She inhaled through her nose, slow and tight, and placed the paper in her binder without a word. The room went quiet except for the hum of the lights and the faint rattle of leaves against the window. My heart was thudding, but I kept my hands still on the table. My fingers interlaced nails, pressing lightly into my skin to ground myself. Keaton looked away, jaw tight, his smirk gone entirely. Amos leaned slightly toward me, his voice just above a whisper. "He's cornered Corbin. But this is only the first round. Don't let your guard down yet." His words felt like both comfort and warning, the weight of the day pressing down harder as I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. As we gathered our things, the fluorescent lights buzzed louder, or maybe I just finally noticed. Outside, the wind caught a pile of leaves, scattering them across the pavement, as if the world itself was trying to remind me nothing stays in one place for long. I glanced through the window at my car, the faint gleam of the cracked cup catching the last bit of sun before a cloud swallowed it. The sight steadied me, oddly enough, proof that even the things that fracture can still hold together for now. The gavel hadn't struck yet, but the silence in the courtroom felt heavier than steel. It pressed on my chest as I sat behind the plexiglass divider, the faint fog of my own breath on the surface. a reminder that the world outside still hadn't shaken off the grip of the pandemic. Every sound carried a shuffle of papers, the creak of the wooden benches behind me, the soft hiss of the air vents trying and failing to mask the lingering scent of old paper and furniture polish. The towering windows let in pale spring light, filtering across the tiled floor in long, sterile beams. Amos was beside me, his file folder bulging with documents, the spine held together by a single strip of yellowed tape. It flaked at the edges, a brittle band keeping the papers from spilling open, just enough strength to hold what mattered together. His fingers drummed lightly on the folder, not out of nerves, but rhythm, as if to remind me to breathe. "Stick to the facts, Corbin," he murmured, his voice gravelly, but calm. "Let the paper do the talking. The judge already knows the truth is leaning your way." Across the aisle, Keaton leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously. His tie already loosened, a bead of sweat sliding down his temple. His lawyer nodded once, jotting something on her tablet, while Keaton's eyes kept darting toward the gallery where Marla sat. Her mask tugged down just far enough to dab at the tears pooling along her lashes. Her gaze shifted between us, between me, stone-faced and still, and Keaton fidgeting like a man trying to escape his own skin. Judge Carmody entered, his black robe sweeping silently as he took the bench. The room rose and sat in practiced unison, the only sound the dull scrape of chairs against the polished floor. His voice, deep and deliberate, rolled out across the chamber. "This matter will proceed. No wasted words, no hint of sympathy, just the heavy cadence of authority." Amos began with the timeline. His presentation was clean, methodical. The emails appeared first, each timestamp flickering to life on the screen, the edits highlighted in subtle red. The court's projector hummed, casting Donna's forwarded chain across the far wall. Next came the security footage, grainy, but clear enough to show Keaton slipping into my home office after at hours, the glow of my monitor spilling across his face as he worked. Finally, Amos placed the forged quitclaim deed on the document camera. The oversized image loomed on the monitor, my name faint and fading under the thick, assertive strokes of Keaton's signature. Keaton's lawyer rose, her voice clipped professional. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges these actions but asks the court to consider the extraordinary circumstances of 2020. This was desperation, not malice. The debts, the investments that crumbled, he was fighting to keep his life from unraveling." Her words hung in the air, softer than I expected, as though even she knew the weight of the evidence could not be softened completely. Keaton spoke only once, his voice cracking despite the bravado he tried to muster. "I wasn't trying to steal Dad. I didn't want to end up living in my car again. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew." His hands twisted together, knuckles whitening, eyes fixed not on me but on the floor beneath his polished shoes. Judge Carmody's brow furrowed, the lines deepening as he looked over the exhibits. "The court will reconvene for one final evidentiary hearing. Before a ruling is rendered," he said, his voice final, like a gavel that didn't need to fall to carry weight. He stood, and with that simple movement, the tension in the room scattered like the echo of a slammed door. As the judge exited, Keaton muttered, his voice low but breaking, "You'll regret this, old man." The words weren't loud enough for the record, but they cut through the air like a blade dulled only by his trembling tone. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, not of me, but of everything slipping away. The courthouse PA crackled to life, the voice metallic and impersonal. "Hearing reconvenes in 2 weeks." The announcement echoed through the chamber, bouncing off marble and wood, until it sounded like something more ominous, like a countdown. Amos leaned close, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of urgency. "We need one last piece, Corbin, the HOA letter. Without it, the chain isn't sealed." He closed the folder with a deliberate motion, the yellow tape creasing, but holding as we stood to leave. The faint squeak of my shoes followed me down the corridor, each step sounding louder than it should in the courthouse's cavernous hall. Outside, the spring breeze carried the scent of wet earth and new blossoms, almost jarring after the airless tension of the courtroom. I paused at the courthouse steps, glancing at the folder Amos carried. The yellow tape caught a shard of sunlight, flickering like a quiet promise that even with fractures some things can hold. Until the end. The envelope slid across the counter with a whisper, its weight far greater than the few sheets it held. Myrna, the HOA secretary, leaned slightly forward, her voice soft as the cinnamon-scented air curling through the office. "I think this is what you're after, Mr. Holloway," she said, her fingers lingering on the edge of the manila flap for a heartbeat before letting go. Her eyes carried that faint mix of curiosity and sympathy, as if she knew the papers inside might hold both victory and cost. The suburban HOA office was quiet, almost sterile, save for the faint hum of a copier and the tick of a wall clock that seemed louder than it should. The smell of toner mingled with the synthetic sweetness of the air freshener, and for a moment it all felt suspended time, the stakes, even my breath. I signed the receipt with my left hand, my right cradling the chipped coffee cup I'd patched just a week before. The gold tape along its side glinted under the overhead lights, a tiny seam that made the crack look deliberate rather than broken. Outside, a crisp autumn breeze tugged at my jacket as I stepped back into the parking lot. Myrna had given me a faint smile and a nod the kind people offer when they sense they're part of something larger, but don't dare ask. I didn't open the envelope yet. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat of my aging sedan, letting the heater whir to life while I stared at the sealed flap. Amos's number blinked on my phone before I could even start the engine. "You got it." His voice was steady, confident. The faint background hum told me he was still in his office, probably leaning back with his boots on the desk. "Yeah," I said, my voice lower than I intended. The HOA records show he didn't just tinker with the house paperwork. He redirected maintenance funds too. Enough to keep him afloat a while, but enough to make the board furious if they ever find out. "Good," Amos replied. "Now we hold it. This is the piece that tips the balance. I'll draft a settlement that lets him keep a shred of stability enough to save face, but the house is yours, clean and final. We do this quiet, Corbin. No fireworks." I let the silence stretch for a moment, watching a pair of leaves skitter across the hood of my car. "Quiet's fine," I said finally, though my chest felt heavy. "He's still my son, Amos. I don't want him crushed, just stopped." There was a pause on the other end before Amos said softer than usual, "Sometimes stopping someone is the kindest thing you can do." When the call ended, I still didn't start the car. The sky was overcast, the sun hiding behind a thin veil of clouds, casting everything in a muted gray. My phone buzzed again this time, with Keaton's name flashing across the screen. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the urge to ignore it. His message was short, almost awkward. "If this is the end, can we at least talk before the hearing?" There was no sarcasm, no bravado, just a line of text that felt heavier than the envelope on the passenger seat. I drove home slowly, the streets lined with trees shedding their last gold and rust-colored leaves. By the time I parked in front of my modest single-story house, the envelope remained unopened. I carried it inside, setting it on my desk beside the patched cup. The tape caught a shard of late-afternoon light glowing faintly as I lowered myself into the chair. The draft settlement sat nearby, untouched, its edges perfectly aligned with the blotter. I stared at both the cup and the paper, my phone still in my hand, Keaton's text glowing on the screen. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen was the only sound in the house, low and rhythmic, like a clock marking time. I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I didn't type a reply yet. My thumb hovered, my eyes shifting between the patched crack on the cup and the bold subject line. On the draft, proposed final agreement. For the first time in years, I felt the line I'd drawn not just on paper, but in my own chest. A line between stopping him and forgiving him, between finality and the faintest thread of understanding. The phone buzzed once more, a follow-up text lighting the screen. "Please, Dad, just a talk." I placed the patched cup gently on the desk beside the unopened envelope and the untouched settlement draft, and let the screen dim to black. The cup sat still on the wooden shelf, its golden tape catching a line of sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the Charlotte Community Center. Beside it, a small plaque gleamed, Holloway Housing Fund, for those starting over. The faint smell of brewed coffee drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the sharp scent of floor wax and the low hum of conversation that filled the room. Volunteers moved between folding tables, their laughter and footsteps softened by the warm acoustics of the center's open hall. I stood near the podium adjusting the microphone. My hands felt steady for the first time in years. At 67, I no longer cared for titles or ledgers, but today my voice mattered in a different way. The workshop crowd was small, mostly retirees, and a few younger families trying to find footing, but their faces held the quiet focus I'd once seen in boardrooms, only now softened by shared struggles. Across the room, Keaton was lining up chairs, his head bent as he worked. No audience, no spotlight, just his hands moving steadily, pulling each chair into place with care. We hadn't spoken much since the settlement finalized last year. I kept the house Amos negotiated terms that spared him complete ruin, and Keaton entered a debt workshop program that ironically enough was now part of the initiative funded by the money I'd clawed back. There had been no grand apologies, no cinematic reunions, just the slow, cautious steps of two people trying not to stumble again. Amos leaned against the far wall, arms folded, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a sentry, but softening when they landed on me. He'd never been one for speeches, but he nodded once, a silent signal that this center, this moment was worth the years of quiet battles and sleepless nights. I cleared my throat and began, my voice carrying just enough to rise above the shuffle of papers and the faint buzz of the coffee maker. "Thank you all for coming," I said, letting my tone remain conversational. "I know these rooms aren't the easiest places to walk into, but I also know what it feels like to wonder if a crack in your life means it's over, or if it's just a sign that something needs mending." The room stilled a little. Some heads nodded. A woman in the back dabbed at her eyes with a folded tissue. I reached for the cup on the shelf, holding it up so the light caught the golden seam along its side. This old thing's been with me a long time. Took a fall, cracked in two, and I almost tossed it. But someone wiser than me reminded me that sometimes what cracks can still hold. My thumb brushed along the tape, the texture rough beneath the smooth glaze. For a moment, I let the silence linger, not heavy, not awkward, just enough for the words to settle. Then I set the cup back on the shelf where it belonged and gestured toward the tables where pamphlets and sign-up sheets waited. This fund isn't about charity, it's about a second foothold. If you're here, you've still got a shot to steady yourself. Let's take it together. A few quiet claps rose, hesitant but real, followed by a hum of conversation as the workshop moved into its next phase. Volunteers passed out coffee. Someone started rearranging a few chairs to form smaller circles for discussion. I stepped down from the podium, rolling my shoulders, as the weight of the moment eased. Keaton lingered by the doorway, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his posture neither defensive nor eager, just present. As I passed, he reached out, not with a word, but with his hand. Our handshake was brief, firm, and without flourish. A nod exchanged, no promises made, but the kind of moment where the silence carried its own meaning. The crowd thinned as the late afternoon light began to fade. Amos drifted closer, clapping me gently on the back. "You did good, Corbin," he said simply, before moving on to help a volunteer stack the last of the pamphlets. I stayed behind, straightening the shelf where the cup rested. The tape glinted one last time as the sun slid lower, turning the seam into a streak of gold. Before the light dimmed, behind me Keaton's voice came low and hesitant. "Dad, maybe we can try again." I didn't turn right away. My fingers traced the rim of the cup before I looked over my shoulder, meeting his eyes. "Maybe we can," I said, the corners of my mouth lifting just enough to soften the line between us. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the quiet lot as the doors of the community center clicked shut behind the last of the volunteers. As the last volunteers drifted out and the streetlights flickered on, I lingered by the shelf, my hand resting on the patched coffee cup. Its gold seam, now smooth and steady, caught the glow from the overhead light, a quiet reminder that cracks don't have to mean endings. Life taught me that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through steady choices and the will to mend what's worth keeping. Sometimes bridges collapse, so we can learn which ones to rebuild and with whom. If you've ever been handed a second chance in disguise, what did you do with it? Share your story below or let this one sit with you tonight.